when you go out and do a startup, the largest investor in it is you, because you're investing your youth, your time, time that you could be having a job, time that you could be doing a completely different startup. And that's a bigger investment than a check for $100K that you could get from an investor. Ultimately, an early stage venture is some people in a market with a plan. These are in priority order, so you really need to nail the people first, then the market, then the plan, and try not to approach what you're doing with an agenda of a solution that's looking for a problem or something messy like that. The team is the most important thing that investors look at, and probably the most limiting factor. And if you talk to most Silicon Valley investors, they filter first on the team, and sometimes all they look at is the team. If your team is good enough, they'll just write you a check. Most investors organize teams by the track record of the founders. So you can look at it as the aggregated track record that everyone has. So if you've sold a company and your co-founder has sold 2 companies, then your team is a serial entrepreneur team with a track record of having sold 3 companies. If you've started a few companies that have failed, that's something that's looked on positively. It's experience. At the level where you're meeting people in college, if you're looking for a co-founder who's a freshman or a sophomore, you're not going to meet too many people who've tried their own startup, but you'll meet a lot of people who have success predictors, who demonstrate success predictors. So maybe they were like the president of their high school class, or they were valedictorian, or they started programming when they were 5 years old. Any success predictor that indicates that they're a really passionate person, approach it like you're hiring. When you're looking for a co-founder, you're essentially hiring each other, right? It's the only scenario where you're kind of mutually hiring. Looking at some different angles for selecting markets, a lot of entrepreneurs I know will take kind of a passion first angle or a convenience first angle. I really understand this well. You want to go opportunity first if you're going to sort of choose one of the context angles. Looking at prerequisites is also key. I mean, you'll have certain criteria that you want to use, and this is personal for everyone. You have to have a passion for it to some degree. It's got to be the right size for what you're going after. I mean, everybody has a certain outcome in mind that they'd like. It's an important thing to make sure you're aligned on, because one of the biggest reasons co-founders split up is the company has an opportunity to exit, and co-founders have differing points at which they'd like to exit. Feasibility, it's got to be something you can actually do, or you can hire somebody to do. Path to revenue. The sooner you get to revenue, the more money you can raise early, and the more easily you can scale up. Exit strategy, you'll want to go into something that has some clear exit strategy. A few different ways to analyze a market, and you want, I would say you'd want to at least understand these. What are the unique challenges in this market? Is there some sort of really core technology that I need to have to succeed here? Maturity, if you're going after a market that's really, really mature, you need to have either a really disruptive strategy or you need to have a plan to grow the market. Competitor characteristics. So if I ever get deep into a market, I start to look at the individual competitors, like the top 5 or 10. I take a look at the founding teams in detail. So I try to get a sense of like, okay, which of the founders are still around at the company? Have any of them cashed out? Did they sell to a private equity firm? If they did, maybe they're no longer motivated to succeed. They could have sold for cash instead of equity. So understanding like sort of the market dynamics is critical because it's different everywhere. I'll touch on maneuverability. If you get into a market, it's good to know that if your first idea fails, you can succeed with a second idea, and that you have some ability to maneuver around and change direction. If you don't, what you'll spend a lot of time doing is learning about this market, then your idea will fail and you'll have to kind of spin up again in a different space. That's when companies fail and investors lose equity. I always recommend to just like fiendishly research, especially if I know I'm about to invest 2 or 3 years of my life in something. I'll talk to as many experts in the space as I possibly can. Ask them as many questions as I can. Serial entrepreneurs, and I say serial, not one time. So if you talk to 10 or 20 folks that have that breadth of experience, you'll often get about 90% of the problems with your idea exposed. I read about it daily. Use the top 10 products. I try to talk to my competitors' customers. There's just so many ways you can kind of hustle online and learn more about a market. And you want to do as much of that as you can. We started off by really mining this idea space. Once we mined it and we had a couple ideas that fell out of that we liked, we then business planned all those ideas. We wanted to have some currency by which we could communicate the idea with others. Boil it down to what you really find relevant. What are your selection criteria? Because you don't want to spend any more time on this than you need to. Filling out a business plan template forces you to think about all the things you really have to think about before you write any code, before you go any further with the idea. I tried to take this automated customer development approach. I budgeted maybe $100 or $200 per idea, and I tried to hire people off Elance, use survey websites like aytm.com, Ask Your Target Market. Went around and just talked to people that I saw, out in San Francisco, and asked what they thought about the different ideas. And the more automated you can make it, the better, especially if you have a lot of ideas to cover. I mean, you don't want to have to go do customer development manually for everything, although you will want to follow up and actually read the results for the ones you like the best. So once you've kind of done all this and you have your list of ideas, you want to weigh those ideas against your established selection criteria. This is our particular template. We started off with market, and this part was just super annoying to deal with. That can take a little while, but you get fast at it. It would take us sometimes 2 days to finish market research for an idea. We eventually got faster at it and found the right resources to go to. We would always do like a little spec for the product, because sometimes I found that my idea and my co-founder's idea for the product were different. Taking like 5 to 10 minutes to just spec it out, 10, 20 bullet points, was really good to get us on the same page. Launch strategy. Not only is go-to-market important, some people have that nailed, but what they don't have is a recurring distribution strategy. A careful study of competitors and comparables is good. Customer development, expert feedback. You want to get, I can't stress this enough, as much expert feedback as you can. People have asked, how can I reach out to domain experts? One way that I've found pretty effective to do this, there's 2 ways. One is just go directly to where the experts are. Go to their executives webpage and find the guys that head up their digital divisions, and then just email the person directly and say, hey, I love what you guys are doing. I'd love to meet up and learn more about the industry. You can also get on LinkedIn and find people that were former employees of companies that you see as competitors. Another thing is, I'm calling this end of year 4 estimates. So our goal was to find a business that could grow to $1 billion in valuation by the end of year 4. We looked at all these end of year 4 numbers, like what would our user count look like, what would our revenue, sales count look like. What we would do is we'd look at comparable public companies, take their revenue, their multipliers on revenue. So if they make $200 million a year, but their market cap is $1 billion, that's a 2.5x multiple. And then we'd essentially try to figure out, okay, assuming we have a 2.5x multiple, what level of revenue do we have to get to be $1 billion company by the end of year 4? And then we'd back everything else off of that, assuming an exponential growth curve from year 1 to year 4. Where do our revenues have to be? We do all this very quickly, though. We didn't dwell on this. This would be more like bullet points than like a 5 or 6 page expression of this in graphs and complicated models. You'd want a model that's very reusable, so you're not wasting a lot of time on it. So ultimately, the end output from all the business plans was, does it meet our criteria? We got fairly jaded going through this process. I mean, because we were just rejecting so many business ideas. But what we had to remind ourselves is that the path to succeeding and to growing a huge business isn't always immediately obvious.